Welcome. So it looks like this is one of those successful meetings where the room is overflowing, but we could have used a bigger room also. So I hope you all have a very successful couple of days. Won't this be interesting? I mean, this particular day. So let me just start and talk about that, the opinion, and then talk about Alzheimer's. Yeah, I was slightly late because I needed to send a note out to our staff to kind of tell people what we need to do for media, and wanted to check my email right before I came to the front. I had, on the way over, received an email from General Counsel at the Department of HHS who says he's expecting that we'll see the opinion around 10:45. I know you all were trying to figure out whether you should break at 10 and watch. The process as it's been described to us has been that the court will, this is all very interesting Supreme Court stuff. I'm a lawyer, but I didn't know this stuff. That the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court will first do kind of a verbal presentation. I mean, that they first give you an oral kind of summary. That's usually done by the majority justice who's writing, and then often a dissenting justice will also make a statement. It's done in the Supreme Court room. You're not allowed to have BlackBerrys or cell phones in the Supreme Court room. So the people who begin the earliest media on this will be listening to what the Supreme Court is saying and start to report that to us. And then once the verbal statements are over, they will publicize online the actual opinion, which, as we can imagine, will be huge. I mean, there are 4 different major decisions for them to decide. And it will be then at that point that everybody can look at the details. So to tell you that that's the process, so that you know sometimes what you kind of hear initially can shift a bit because people are reporting on the verbal and don't really have kind of the nuance or the complexity until they start reading. I won't start to get kind of my own briefings on this till the end of the day, as we've had a chance for department lawyers to start looking at it. So you all can keep an eye on what's happening, but that's the very unusual process of the Supreme Court. So welcome. I'm glad that you have convened to talk specifically about Alzheimer's. This is an issue that is just incredibly important, and I just want to thank the MetLife Foundation and the Alliance for Aging Research for bringing this together to talk about advances in research for people with Alzheimer's. I'm one of those individuals who has lived with dementia in my family. I mean, this is so common. We talk often about dementia. I see Jane in the back, say, Jane, but then there's these other related dementias as well. And I had a grandmother who lived with vascular dementia that she eventually died from. It was, I think, a slightly different disease progression than Alzheimer's. I mean, we're certainly, as I've kind of learned more, found that out. But this impacts all of our families and all of our friends. And last fall, I had a personal friend who was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and fairly young, at 60. And I just thank you for what you're doing, both as kind of a family member and a friend, watching people and seeing up front the initial stigma. And when someone has an early diagnosis, they still have friends, but their friends don't know that, and their friends stop calling, and it's just hard to see how much support is needed. I was very proud a couple of months ago when the president announced a new initiative to focus specifically on Alzheimer's, both Alzheimer's research, and I see Dr. Bernard is here from the NIA, what we can do to do additional research. Our particular role at AOA and ACL, which I will describe to you, is to try to administer additional grant dollars, if we can get those through the process, but also do an awareness campaign. And I hope you all have a chance to look at alzheimers.gov, the new campaign that we put together. It is just stellar work. I mean, one of the things that I've been involved in that's just worked all the right way. Washington can be a really interesting place to try to get something done and through the process, because there's a lot of process. But when the president announced this initiative, we happened to be in a position that we were already working on a long-term care awareness campaign. This is so similar, that we were able to quickly work with the contractor that we had on board, add a new task, and direct our energies to Alzheimer's. And the videos that we put together, the specific commercial we put together about how you help people answer the questions that they have, it's just really impactful. We have 4 vignettes as well as the commercial on the website at alzheimers.gov. We showed it at a recent staff meeting, and I sent them home. I showed them to my partner at home. I had seen them, and I'm sitting in my living room crying again watching them, because they're just so moving to hear family members talk about the burden of caregiving and sort of the love of caregiving and what they're trying to accomplish, so, and the types of support they need. So thank you all for coming together. ACL, let me just describe briefly. We simply feel like and have felt like at the department, both at AOA and the larger agency of HHS and our disability colleagues, that we would be stronger if we worked together. That there are so many issues that people with disabilities and people who are older have in common. They are not the same populations. No one is trying to indicate that these are the same populations. You know, people with Down syndrome have a greater risk factor, a greater likelihood of getting Alzheimer's disease. There are so many connections between the populations and the services that we simply felt we would be stronger together. So we created a new agency. It's the first time in 20 years that HHS has created a new agency. We named it the Administration for Community Living. We brought together 3 already existing components of HHS: the Administration on Aging, which has been its own kind of independent agency within HHS, the Office on Disability. Office on Disability, head by Henry Claypool, has been existing in the Office of the Secretary. It's largely a policy office. And then the Administration on Developmental Disabilities, which has been at the Administration for Children and Families. Sort of in midair, ADD added I. They added intellectual to the name, so it's the Administration for Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities. And it's not really possible in the federal government to just form sort of a federation or a coalition. I mean, you know, it's kind of collective. I mean, these are really not federal structures. We had, in order to do this, to create a new sort of operating, a new tent, a new house, however you want to describe it, that we could all be in together. We never pursued adding disability to aging for very deliberate reasons. We did not want to create an agency where disability was ever added on to aging. It needs to be established in its own right with its own kind of equilibrium. That's my current favorite word to describe how we need to coexist. Disability is not an ancillary part of aging. It's a different field, a different experience in life. So we created a new agency and chose the word community living because it was neutral and it was descriptive and visionary. And it is aspirational in the sense that it really reflects the goal of all of the different populations that we're serving. The success of the agency moving forward will depend on achieving the right balance that we need. And the right balance we'll have to reflect internally, but we need the right balance with the stakeholders as well. The balance of finding the common denominators. Alzheimer's impacts people of all ages. And the uniqueness. There are differences, families supporting children with developmental disabilities and an adult family caregiver caring for someone with Alzheimer's. These are different. So how do we achieve the balance between the uniqueness and the difference? We will continue to run the Administration on Aging programs. We will continue to have AOA as an entity, just as we will have AIDD as an entity. These are the major program branches of the Administration for Community Living. We haven't amended the Older Americans Act. Older Americans Act services are now suddenly sort of going to be given away to people with disabilities. They actually need some similar support, but the answer is not necessarily to open up the Older Americans Act. It's tapped already. So how do we deal with family supports kind of from a different angle? The work that we have been doing that impacts kind of your conversation, the family caregiver program will continue to be administered through AOA. The lifespan respite program that we've been administering is now a good example of an integrated program that needs to continue to have both the support of AOA, but the input of the Administration for Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities. Much of the advocacy work for the Lifespan Respite Grant came from the disability community as they really worked to advocate to get this legislation passed. So we continue to be really excited. The reaction that we've had from the stakeholders has not been unanimous. That's not what we were expecting, but overwhelmingly the same. That most of the stakeholders we've dealt with, both from the aging and disability kind of fields, and there are multiple fields, have been cautiously optimistic and worried. And it doesn't matter who you are in the stakeholder group I'm describing, they all have the exact same worry, which is how do we make sure we don't get lost? And I actually think that's the right worry. I mean, as a federal administrator of this agency, as a federal official, that's what I have a responsibility to uphold, is to make sure that populations don't get lost. That's what the advocates have a right to expect. So to the degree that people are helpful and supportive, I'm glad. To the degree that they worry, I'm also glad about that, because we want to do this in a way that lifts everyone up and supports them. We are stronger together. We have a different type of strength and expertise in long-term care that we have never had before, and need to continue to just do this work together. So I'm going to slip back and turn my TV on. I rarely have my TV on in my room, in my office, and kind of watch the day progress. The issues that you're dealing with here, as humans, are impacted by what happens today, but they're really not. In watching kind of what's happened in the last 2 years, believe that there are two huge kind of forces in play that are transforming our lives and our work. One is kind of reflected in the Affordable Care Act, but it's bigger than that. It's the transformation of the healthcare system. It's the integration of healthcare with long-term care and community services. That will continue. We don't know kind of what path it will take until maybe a little bit sense of that at the end of the day. But that will continue. How do we, and this is something that we all have in common, how do we take a holistic approach to providing care for someone with Alzheimer's and their family, and work with their providers and plan for their long-term care? This conversation will continue. And the conversation at the state level, driven by the tremendous burden of states with regard to Medicaid budgets, will also continue. The move to manage long-term care on a Medicaid program will continue, regardless of what happens today. Both of these conversations are tremendously impacting the aging and disability network of providers on how they continue to have a role. And they are impacting consumers, because much of what we've been working on kind of collectively as advocates for consumers is a person-centered approach that really looks at the individual needs and puts together systems and supports for the individual. And that is what we have to hang on to in all of this transformation, to make sure that we continue to advocate and be a voice for the individual. I had the opportunity yesterday morning to tape a piece with the Parkinson's Action Network. It's a group I hadn't worked with before. And they were talking about caregiving for people with Parkinson's. And I closed that in the way that I want to close this. The woman who was interviewing me asked me kind of what I would suggest that people could do to help the cause. And my answer would be the same. And I'll say this to you all because you work with people with Alzheimer's and families. The hardest thing I ever ask someone to do is to admit when they're failing. And I talk to seniors about this, and I talk to families about this, because this is not something that's easy for families to acknowledge. But if we're really going to get at the heart of support for Alzheimer's, people with Alzheimer's, their families, we must talk about the struggle, the willingness to provide the love and the care, but also the failures of being able to have enough respite care, of being able to get transportation when we need it. We have to encourage advocates themselves to talk about what they're struggling with. So those of us that are policymakers can then talk to people about solutions. And I think grassroots advocacy is best reflected when people do that. People, consumers, don't need to follow legislation. They don't need to know the ins and outs of what happens today. They need to talk about their lives and their struggles, and then it's our responsibility to be at the table to figure out how to lift that and provide solutions and figure out a way to fund them. So good luck today, good luck tomorrow. As you're watching, I don't know where are you, is it the sports bar? I don't know whether you're all adjourning to the sports bar. But good luck. I'll take, I don't know if I didn't come over to do a keynote, but if you have any quick questions or something, I can certainly answer them before I head off. Yes?
I know that there's one piece of federal legislation that's uniquely for Alzheimer's families, the Alzheimer's Disease Support Services program. I wonder, is there any vision from the agency for that program going forth?
We are participating in the Federal Advisory Committee, and they just came up with their report. The administration's response, kind of at this point, has been the initiative that the president announced with the additional commitment of $130 million to try to focus more on research as well as individual supports. Now, we all know we can make recommendations about funding, but it's the legislative branch that controls the purse. So we can provide support, but it will take kind of an effort of both branches to be able to make that happen. And that really coincides with how the administration can make an additional investment to support the advancement of the National Alzheimer's Plan. The National Alzheimer's Plan is being led in HHS by one of the assistant secretaries in the Office of Planning and Evaluation to show the administration's support. It was important that when we did the press club announcement on the administration's commitment, that it was the Secretary Sebelius, Francis Collins from the NIH, and myself, all talking about the need for research and services, both. So, you know, the plan itself will be larger, and we'll move forward in increments, And that's really how it's designed to work. So I think we've made the step forward at this point, and we'll continue to work with the committee. All right, I'm going to head back to my office now. So good luck. Good luck to us all today.